So it was December 5th, 2017, and I was sitting in my counselor's office just talking about the mess I was in. My husband and I had just lost over $100,000 in our business, and I couldn't get my mind straight enough to do anything about it. And my husband here, the wonderful photographer, he's a centered guy. He's great at jumping in and just bailing water. And all I could do was just sit and stare at this mess, just spinning on how horrible this scene was. And my counselor was asking me questions like, hey, could you get a job? Could you work in the evenings? Could you take on side gigs? And that's when it happened. My heart rate jacked up about 200 beats per minute, slightly less than it's beating now. All the blood drained from my face. I had a tingling sensation run down my left arm. And I was so lightheaded, I was sure I was going to pass out. I need you to call 911, I told my counselor. I think I'm having a heart attack. Now, fortunately, she knew what was actually going on. I was in the middle of a full-blown panic attack. And while she helped me calm down in that moment, I wasn't the same after that. I spent the next 6 months in a nervous breakdown dealing with crippling panic and anxiety. So how'd I get there? Well, if you're looking on the surface, like I was that day, you'd probably say it was because my husband and I had just lost all that money. You'd probably say it was because we were now trying to make payroll for 6 employees, pay the benefits on pay our full benefits package, and keep our own life afloat with our mortgage and our bills, all on the revenue from one single client. I mean, you might even say it's because I lost my dad the year before, and that really sent a lot of ripple effects through my family that we were still dealing with. But again, if you thought any of that, you'd just be looking at the surface, like I was that day. It took me a lot of therapy and coming up on 5 years to figure out is that it wasn't the big stuff that broke me. What sent me into that place, what made me crumble when the big stuff hit, is that I spent about 25 years of my life wearing what I've come to believe is the scariest, most terrifying mask that any human being can ever wear. And that's the mask of fine. I'm fine. My career's fine. The relationship is fine. My family's fine. The trouble with fine is that it keeps us stuck because it's not bad enough to make us muster up the courage and go for what we really want. By putting on this mask of fine, and not just putting on my mask of fine, but labeling things, putting a mask on other things in my life and calling them fine, that mask allowed me what felt like the luxury of not having to face my fear, of not having to go for what I really wanted in my career, of settling for a career, spending 20 years in an industry I didn't like, and even starting a business in it. And before I met this wonderful man, spending 7 years married to a guy he was a nice guy. He was fine. He really was. If I showed you it on paper, you couldn't see any reason why I would divorce this guy. But he wasn't for me. I spent 10 years in a toxic company because they paid decent. They had good bonuses. They paid good benefits. It was fine. Fine allows us to sell out our happiest life and highest potential. Because we settle for something Fine allows us to settle in mediocrity. And that's where I found myself for 25 years until I had that breakdown in my counselor's office. And looking back, I can see that was one of the biggest blessings of my life, because it forced me to take off that mask of fine and figure out what was really underneath. And underneath that mask was just a scared little girl who was so afraid to bet on herself, who was so afraid to go for what she really wanted because she didn't know if she could make it. She didn't know if she could talk to her family about the dynamics that were so hurtful to her. She didn't know if she could actually figure out a career that she really liked. For 7 years, she didn't know if she could actually leave that relationship and find another one that would actually light her up. Here's what I had to learn the hard way. Fine is not fine. The safe choice that we're making because it's fine, it's not the safe choice. But they're great seductresses. They trick us into thinking that we can avoid risk and all the scary what-ifs that go along with it while still getting the benefits of growth and confidence and expansion and building the life we want. But it doesn't work that way. What actually happens is that fine becomes soul-sucking and safe becomes shrinking. And so to this day, I refuse to wear that mask of fine in my life. I've chosen to bet on myself. If you can relate to this story, I encourage you to bet on yourself and bet on possibility and your own expansion instead of safety and comfort and fine. Thank you.